guardian, and then you can see where the language was changed again to reflect people first language. On page 53, item 3222, again, to reflect people first. Item 325 on that page, rather than to encourage directors, directors will distribute, this one I need to go back and change it, so I will make a change there. But basically they wanted it to say that directors will distribute the brochures and presentation flyers and not as well as, but and promote the dissemination of CAC information. So that change will be made before it goes forward again. Page 54, item 4-1, the selection process, it said if the selection process is determined by each district. Page 55, item 426, again the 10 is changed to 9. 431, OMSD is stricken. And page 58, immediate past chairperson, the word A is in there and is a member of the executive committee. Page 59, item 725, we added the word and assist in, so it will assist in the solicitation of nominees, assist in judging, and assist in the selection of finalists, so that it was consistent there. And page 60, item 8-6, again to change to people first language. And item 8-10, provide information concerning in-service training individuals wish to attend. The recommendation was to take individuals may wish to attend and instead focus on providing the information concerning in-service training. And then on page 6 on page 6 of the change document, we have what the annual budget plan looks like again. Any questions?
So just a clarification on the background. So you said you informally or informally made a request that if OMSD denied the waiver, that you would name the result of the formal request, or was this a...
No, I'm just saying that would be an option that we would have to look at.
Oh, okay.
We would have to collaborate and work on it together.
Okay, I just make sure I heard it right.
Yeah.
So
no,
you just kind of threw it out there. That's
wanted to
point.
express that as one option that we would have discussion. Okay. Then we have program transfer, and we have a public comment on that. And that is
Thank you. I'm very supportive of the program transfers. I commend the districts that are taking advantage of this opportunity because I don't think you're getting a bang for your buck at the SILPA. Unlike the American Express commercial, membership does not have benefits here. And basically you're paying twice. You're paying twice. We saw this trend out of the Ontario Montclair School District, for example, where they were having to pay for their own independent evaluations. And that should be a function of the SILPA. I mean, really, SILPA has just become a litigation fund and an insurance company that pays claims. And it's only those families that go to due process that are really getting the services, because the IEP process has become hijacked by the SELPA. Now, on this program transfer issue, it brings out an important policy question, which is the SELPA's interest the same as the district's interest? And I'm here to tell you that in many cases it's not. The Coalition for Adequate Funding in Special Education does not necessarily have your best interest at heart and the interest of the districts that you represent. As an example, many years ago, there was an initiative by the coalition to restrict $91 million statewide and prevent districts from using that money and earmark that money so that it could only be used by the SELPA and SELPA staff. Those 91 millions could be put to good use for OT, for speech, for the services that your district needs. Luckily, thanks to an effort by the community and the community in this room as well, we approached our legislators and the governor's office, and that initiative did not go through. But your districts were relying on the Coalition for Special Education when they were not advocating for your district's best interest. They were advocating to give themselves more power and to take power away from your district. So I encourage you to be proactive and watch what the Coalition for Special Education is doing, and really represent your districts and find out if those proposals are in the best interest of the boards that you represent. Thank you.
Alrighty, in your packet, you have the program transfers that were recommended, and if you'll recall, last April, we also had some that were forwarded to our office, and we took them to the superintendent's council after you reviewed them and the committee met in our usual process, because we did not know the timing of everything, and so that you would be ready to be able to transfer your students if we had to wait a year and a day. So, we will be taking the others that have been forwarded to us in September to the superintendent's council for first read in December, and then for approval in January, as we do customarily. The committee has met and reviewed the responses to the questions, and we would recommend that they move forward as has been requested. Is there any comment or question or any further recommendation that anybody would like to discuss? All right, Timothy, St. Green, you have a public comment.
Thank you. Just a reminder, the fiscal notifications are summaries, and the detailed backup supporting documentation for all of these items is included in the fact packet, which was sent out electronically to all of you. I'm starting with A. It's just our most recent mental health funding projection. In total, we're projecting about $4,187,000 to be passed on to Western districts. There's a table listed there to show you each district specific projection. The other thing of note is the fee-for-service rate for mental health counseling is projected to be $8,579. And comparing this projection to the one from April of last year, our ADA dropped, so our revenue went down a little bit, our projected revenue. And the cost of residential room and board and counseling expenses is projected to go up by about $180,000. So we're comparing it to our projection from April. The amount of money getting passed on to districts is about $180,000 less. Our fee-for-service rate is actually coming in less than what we projected in April. And if there aren't any questions, I'll move on to B. Okay. B, our 16-17 admin budgets as a first interim. We have a table below summarizing what our revenue and expenses are and our projected ending balances are, starting with 282, which is our XPOT. We'll talk about the XPOT return later on in the agenda, but I just wanted to mention that the export return came in really close to zero. It came in about $40,000 that was actually related to the export. So that was good in the sense that our projection was very close. But then it scares me for this year because the export expenses always go up every year. So at the amount I'm having to budget, this might be the first year where our export reserve, we might actually go into our reserve. Our reserve amount is $500,000. If you see the ending balance, which is $328. So this, right now, with the amount of stuff I'm having to budget because of encumbrances, we're projecting to dip into our reserve amount. So it's just an FYI, I want to keep you posted. We'll look at it again in second interim. Hopefully the expenses come in lower, which could be the case. Kids come and go. Most of the expenses are related to non-public schools. So it's hard to project if they're going to be here the whole year. They might move, something like that. But going to 284, which is our self-operating budget, we're right where we should be. I do have to budget a little bit lower for our 4,000 and 5,000 expenses, which is what we use to operate our budget, non-salary expenses. But it's pretty close, it's in line with what we ended the last year as. And our reserve amount is right at about 10% of where we need to be. The last two are 289, which is our behavior intervention fee for service. It's a $3,000 budget. That's one service. That's the cost of one kid. We usually have 1 to 2 kids. Finally, our staff development budget, which is the last line item. It's $14,000. We spend more than that. Whatever we spend over that in staff development comes out of our self-operating budget. Are there any questions on B before I move on to C? Okay. Item C is just letting you know that for our special ed reports, the maintenance of effort, excess cost calculation in Table 8, all the districts and the West Penn SELPA as a whole met the requirements of all 3 of these reports. Just to quickly touch on what the reports are, the maintenance of effort report, it's a requirement of receiving federal funds is that those funds should not be used to supplant state and local funds, but they should supplement. So in order to meet that requirement, they do 2 tests. One is called a compliance test, where they basically say, they compare your current year, in this case 15-16, to the prior year to make sure that your state and local expenses are at least the same amount as the prior year, because if it dropped down, then that means you're using federal funds to supplant state and local. Sorry if I'm confusing that. But that's why they call it maintaining your effort. So they want you to maintain the same level of expenditures from the prior year, at least that amount or above that amount. The next test they do is called the eligibility test, and they're basically saying, what are you budgeting for the following school year? And if you're budgeting more than the prior year, then you are eligible to receive federal funds. So those are your 2 maintenance of effort, reports that every district has to do and the SELPA has to do as a whole. The next thing is called the excess cost calculation. That calculation is based on every student is a general ed student first. So what they do is they basically come up with a average per student, multiply that average by the number of special ed kids you have, and that becomes the minimum amount of state and local funds you have to spend on your special ed kid before you use federal dollars, because they are general ed students first. And lastly, this Table 8 report, which is just a report where districts submit how much federal dollars they use on something called coordinated early intervening services. None of our districts use any of their local assistance federal dollars on that, so pretty much the report submitted is zeros. Are there any questions on any of the reports? Okay. So I'm moving on to letter D. It's on the next page. It's just your final transportation excess cost transfer. When the county does their transportation excess cost transfers, they do 2 50% transfers, and then when the books close, they do a final transfer. This item D is the final transfer from last year, and in total, about $757,000 will be transferred from districts to county transportation. Currently, there's 5 districts using county transportation: Altaloma, Chaffey, Chino, OMSD, and Upland. There were about 319 kids for last year, and it came out to roughly 9,992 per kid. Ralph is here if you have any questions, specific questions on it. If not, I'll move into his 16-17 initial 50% transfer, which is item E. For 16-17, the projected amount is actually a little bit lower per student. It's about $9,963, maybe $30 less per student. In total, they're projecting about almost $3.3 million, so about half of that will be transferred once this goes to the Superintendent's Council in December. And like I said before, they'll do another 50% transfer somewhere around March or April, and then once the books close, they'll do a final adjustment the following school year. Are there any questions for myself or Ralph regarding transportation costs? Per student amount? About $9,992. And for 16-17, it was $9,963. Sure. Okay.
Okay, we have two public comments on item C4, legally.
Thank you. On the XPOT return, I know Nancy Kelly from Upland Unified has made several requests on this item and on the structure of the XPOT as a whole. And Dr. Kelly has commented that the Upland Unified School District does not support the XPOT structure. But in the time that I've been following these meetings, I have not seen any appropriate response from the SELPA on how to address her concerns. And the XPOT remains a litigation fund where I believe the current policy is that if the districts choose to go to due process, they get a reimbursement of 100%, versus if the district choose to avail themselves of services, the SELPA only reimburses 70%. So there's an incentive to litigate. Furthermore, I mean, it wasn't included in the package today, but there is a procedural manual for dispute resolution at the SELPA, which basically gives Susan authority to dictate whether or not the district is going to go to due process. And it basically states that whenever a district does not follow the SELPA recommendation, they will be liable for all their legal fees and will get no SELPA assistance whatsoever. So it gives Susan ultimate authority to dictate how that case is going to be handled. And she's not at IEP meetings. The district people, I mean, that's why the SELPA has hijacked the IEP process, and the XPOT is the perfect example. There's an incentive to litigate in the policy, and these are people that are far removed. They're, you know, bureaucratic elites in a distant building on Archibald and 7th, not at the IEP meeting in your districts. So I think this is definitely a disservice to your districts and to your IEP teams, which in Upland Unified, we heard a couple of months ago from staff who came to the board meeting to testify how the special ed director, most likely because she follows the policies of the West End SELPA, was essentially telling them not to provide services to students. And they refused to engage in the violation, which they knew that it was a violation not to give needed services to students at IEP meetings. Thank you.
David Palmer, same topic.
Well, I was glad to see that this amount that's being transferred was significantly lower than the $750,000 that was returned a year ago. Glad to see that Tim's doing a better job at monitoring that, but I am confused about how it's being reported, because at the last PAC, under item C1A, Tim reported that the XPLOT contributions were decreased, but were still within